Welcome back, and lovely to have you here again. This is the second half of the conversation we started last week. And if you haven't heard part 1 yet, I gently suggest starting there, as this picks up right where we left off. You're in for a treat, so settle in, get comfortable, and enjoy every minute of part 2. On one of your most powerful ideas is that internal audit should be seen itself as a talent incubator for the entire organization, not just as a function that protects its own people. You describe a virtuous circle, attracting strong people, developing them intensively, and then this is the part of many heads of audit struggling with: let them go, rather than retaining them at any price. So
Yes.
that feels contradictory to me. Most leaders are measured on keeping their best people. Could you please make that case for us? Why does deliberately exporting your talents into the business make audit stronger, not weaker? And how do you protect quality and continuity when, by design, your best people are always moving on? And maybe an additional question on that. I have seen also head of internal audit rotating out of their function after 7 or 8 years without really a plan of where they're going to go.
Yes, Thomas. Look, we in the previous part, we talked about building the dream team. So it touches 2 of 3 elements of talent management. It's the attracting talent and then developing talent. But then you have the third part, which is about retaining and or placing talent. So building the dream team is attracting and developing. But now we're talking about building the function of choice. So you don't need to, or I don't want to take internal audit on a standalone basis, but internal audit as a component of the organization. And this is where the idea of talent pool or incubator comes from. Internal audit can be an opportunity for the organization as a function to be a place where you put good, maybe the best talents, certainly some of them, so that they do a kind of tour, if you will, before they continue to evolve in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
I always challenged that view that you need to keep your best guys at all price. Why? If really the guy is really good, at some point that person will go anyway. And there is a good chance actually that person will be lost not only to your team of internal audit, but actually to your organization.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we rather say, okay, these persons are really good. Let's change the parameters and make sure that we offer a perspective and visibility, a career path beyond internal audit within the organization. So I'm not in favor of a constant pro domo approach by internal audit. Again, yes, strong solutions to attract and develop.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to retaining and placing, I would rather make sure that we have our good corporate citizens and not internal audit citizens. Maybe that's a simple way to explain that. So it takes a bit of courage in a way, because I use that expression with my teams. I need to cut my right arm regularly. That's painful. To lose a good guy. But at the same time, and for the many of us who are in managerial roles, what better gratification and reward can you get to see a guy who was developing well with you, continue the journey and having a fantastic career within your organization? That's extremely rewarding. So as a manager, and you can be recognized in your turn by your organization as a good leader for also doing that. So I would say a few things here when it comes to cutting your right arm. It's really about making sure that you develop a long-term view. Trying to keep someone at all costs is really short-sighted. Sorry, no offense to anybody, but it's certainly a short-term perspective. The long-term view is that you build control and risk experts, and that you will feed the organization over the years with managers who may become, even one day, CFO or CEO, that have been at some point for a few years, 2 to 5 years maybe, in internal audit, but they have learned the ropes. They understand the culture. They are your best allies in the future. So you make we're talking about culture, you make the organization stronger. And as a chief audit executive in particular, is there a stronger aspiration than that? It's not only about producing your reports and your plans and doing your job in conformance with the standards, etc. All good. But the bigger picture, if I want to call it this way, the bigger aspiration is that your legacy will be that you have built or contributed to building a stronger organization from a risk and control perspective. And by feeding the organization by strong, which that's how you contribute to and how you deliver sustainable, and strong value. The second point is, come to think of it, if you do not make this proactive and not reactive, proactive placing of your talents, how are you going to keep a high energy level in your team, in your audit team, and a high engagement level? When you have talented guys, they are hungry. So you're going to feed them very well for the 2 to 5 years, instinctively or by experience. This is a bit what I've visualized or witnessed. But these guys also have aspirations, high ambition levels. And if you try to block them, the word is a bit strong, but again, that's something I may have witnessed in the past. You just develop frustration and ultimately possible disgruntled employees. Worse than that, you have attracted good guys from the business. That's my model of attraction. But then you don't deliver on the fact that, this was a strong actuary, a strong engineer, came to audit to have a strong universal view, and then you block him, and they lose a little bit their initial passport, which was, I'm a strong actuary, I'm a strong engineer. So you need to make sure that that person doesn't stay too long. Now, the question is how long is too long, but I would say make sure that this person keeps a kind of internal market value. Okay, so you have the engagement, you have the market value. It's not monetary; it's more about employability, if you want to call it this way, and it's about the higher aspiration level. And then you were talking a bit about bureaucracy before, Thomas. And I think somehow the capacity that you have to place your talents is a kind of acid test for you. And I call it the 3 C's. The first C is complacency. If you stay for too long, you may develop auditors that are a bit in the theoretical view that are running their jobs, not only the TAE, but even the talents. You get into a kind of routine. It has a bit to do with the energy level. So complacency is something you want to avoid. You want to avoid to be in the comfort zone for too long. You talk regularly to the C-suite. You are recognized, but then you are recognized, but nobody would think about hiring you. I'm forcing, of course, exaggerating a little bit. But this comfort zone may be a false sense of comfort. So that's the second C. And then you have this notion of commitment to organization. Let's not forget that internal audit is part of the organization. It's not a separate body like external audit. So, and I call this the acid test and the third C, because somehow showing that you are capable to give back the talents to organization is your commitment to the organization as well. So that's a kind of key path, if you want to call it way. The complacency, the comfort zone, and the commitment is a way to express that you need to keep on your toes and avoid a kind of bureaucratic approach. This rotation discipline is maybe the application of the old up or out principle that you have and you had in external audit as well.
Yeah.
And up can be, for certain of auditors, you become a supervisor, a manager, and maybe your objective will be to become the chief audit executive. That's very commendable. Or up is you continue your journey in progressing in the organization elsewhere than internal audit. So it's nothing insulting for an auditor to move out of internal audit. That's actually a proof of success. That's a bit how I envision this notion of incubator or what I call internal audit as a function of choice in an organization.
Hervé, I would like to stay on that for a short moment. First, I absolutely love what you're saying. Now, the more challenging point. I discussed this kind of solution or way to operate, to incubate people, taking it from their business, have them working for you 2, 3, 4 years and bringing them back into the business. In reality, it never happened. Why? Because I was explained it doesn't work from a salary level perspective. It doesn't work because difficult with HR. It doesn't work for they don't have the right skills, you name it, etc. There were always reasons. So the question I would like to ask you is, where do you start? Do you start with sitting down as HR and start figuring out or planning like a talent plan and how you're going to do that? Or what I liked about your answer was you were saying you look in the organization for talents to bring into internal audit. And then in parallel, you directly observe also the job market in the organization to bring your people in and without even talking to HR, develop a healthy circle of exchange. And then you start talking to HR. So I'm very much wondering of how you did it. And in the introduction, we mentioned you had 900 people in your team, so it make things maybe a little bit more easier than if you only have 2, 3, or 4 people in your team. So I would love to hear from you of how do you start this the best way.
So you have several aspects to that, but I would like to start with the formal aspects. Again, you need a plan. We talked a bit about managing resources. As a team at individual level, I encourage everyone, every manager in particular, and then each auditor to have a personal development plan, which is also, it's not an administrative piece of paper. It's really a contract that you have with the individual of what's going to happen to you. You join this function. Thank you for trusting us. What is it going to happen to you in terms of training and development over the next 3 years within the internal audit? Now, in addition to this personal development plan, it's really how you manage the function itself. And I think I would outline 2 aspects. The first aspect is the diversity of engagements. Because audit is not a black box, but we have many ways of doing engagements. I hear sometimes colleagues telling me this audit is going to last 6 months, and that's something I found also in the Allianz Group when I started the role for the first time in 2005. You were mentioning the 900 people. One of the first things we did collectively was transform our methodologies to make sure that all of the audit teams in the 40 countries operate in the same fashion. So we replicated the Big Four model. So wherever you are in Allianz geographically or in terms of entity, the audit methodology is the same. And what does it entail? It means that no on-site work will last more than 3 weeks. So the end-to-end assignment is 6 weeks, preparation, field work, and report, blah, blah, blah. Okay, classic. But that's not going to exceed 6 weeks, and that's going to be 2 to 3 weeks on field. When it comes to HR, this has a consequence. That means that the value proposition that as an employer I give to the auditor is that you're going to be involved in between 6 to 8 engagements per year, and after your 2 initial years, you will have seen or participated in 15 engagements. And that's very important in terms of development plan, because it's not only the education you're going to receive, it's also the exposure and the actual promise that you will have truly an horizontal view. And that's very important because it depends on how many objects that you have on your audit universe. But in Allianz, we had about 75 objects in the audit universe. I'm talking about the standard insurance company anywhere in the group. If you do 15 audits in 2 years, you haven't seen everything, but you can say you've seen a good bit already. And certainly after 5 years, you start getting a good familiarity about what is insurance about, okay? From sales to back office to IT to head office function.
Yeah.
And that's important. The second thing on how you handle internally is not only the number of engagements, is also how do you treat the auditors. Simple ropes. I give you just one example. Make sure that when you make the debriefing or the closing meeting, make sure that everyone is involved, present, from the most junior to the most senior auditor but also let them speak and present, and not only the manager or the chief audit executive taking the light, because you need to make sure that you put your guys in the light and you create visibility. Why? Why? Because part of the promise is precisely audit is well positioned. We have exposure to the C-suite in particular. When in your career will you have a chance to present? Maybe it's going to be only 10 minutes, but you will have a chance of 10 minutes window to explain to the CEO or the chief operating officer A, B, C, and D. Okay. And that's important because this is how, irrespective of the quality of the HR processes that we have, how talents are sometimes identified. And you've been around like me for quite some time, Thomas, less than me, but still you have quite some experience. And you know that besides all the bureaucracy, just to use your word, it's also about, personal contacts. Oh, I saw this guy or this lady seem particularly interesting. You create some familiarity. I call it put a face on the name. And that's important. So at the end of the day, I understand that sometimes it fails because you're not capable to replace or to place you guys in the business. But if you do these things, multiplicity of engagements, create visibility, create also gravitas, because you can have a guy with 30, 35, to my example before. If you get exposed to more senior people in the organization, you learn how also, no, it's not only what you say, but how you say it, on your personality, how you present yourself. I call it gravitas. So, and also making sure that you manage your priorities, not go on to the details, but on really what matters to this particular stakeholder you're talking to. So you learn to put things into the context, and it's not about demonstrating the quality of what you do by the number of things that you do, but on the impact. And you should talk only about the impactful things that you may have. This is how I think it has worked. It has worked, and it still works in Allianz. I'm not saying it's perfect, of course, but by and large, and then with the good support of HR, you make that happen. Maybe I could add also that there are things that we organized as well. One thing I've introduced many years ago was called the Mercato. Mercato, and now we are in the days of the World Cup, but Mercato is the exchange of football players between clubs. When you are in a larger organization, certainly Allianz is a very large one, but also for an organization that would have 2 or 3 audit teams in different locations, entities, or even sometimes geographies, you can proceed to an exchange of players, of auditors, for the length of an engagement. It doesn't create any form, I think, of conflict of interest, of independence. Sometimes
so you
the
say
only
guest auditors.
Well, no. It can be audit to audit. So the Italian
Okay.
auditor in Allianz Italy joins
Okay,
an
I
audit
see.
in France, etc. So you need to manage the language considerations, but in most cases that works. You have indeed, we had that as well, the guest auditors, bring a guy from the business. That's an exposure to the audit and a way to learn. But I'm still in the process of how do I make it successful for the auditors themselves. And the fact that you not only the number of engagements, but get exposure to different entities or different geographies, that's how something also makes the function appealing and prepares your placement for the future. So at the end of the day, I call it seeding the people. Well, sometimes we hear about seed money for venture capital. But you have the seed people. That is an important function for the chief audit executive. But it needs 3 things: a broad scope, so that people are really, after a few years, with a brain extremely open. You need the diversity of experiences, and then you need the support of the board and HR. Certainly, if there is no tone at the top and no interest by the board, in particular the CEO as well, to promote actively the internal audit function, it doesn't really work. My personal benchmark on the French market, and an organization that is well recognized for that, is Société Générale, the banking group, where you have the famous Inspection Générale. Already in my time, and I think it's still the case, was actually selecting very good candidates. And this is the incubator we talked about.
Yeah.
And when you look today at the top guys of Société Générale, a significant portion of them, at some point, got into their career through the inspection générale. So that work. You may say, okay, maybe it's a French environment, maybe it's a bank, but since you have a successful model and it can work at different degrees, maybe Société Générale is the ultimate absolute, but you can still work into through this direction and certainly not accept from the very beginning that you're going to keep your guys in audit and that's it. One point, Thomas, that we didn't elaborate too much, but I would like to say a word about that. It comes to career management is that it's important to stay minimum 2 years because when you talk to younger guys, maybe specifically Generation Z, but I don't like to classify so much people like this. But anyway, I hear sometimes that maybe younger colleagues want to move out relatively rapidly from a particular function because they believe, right or wrong, that after a few weeks or a few months, they are done and they've seen in everything. Personally, first, I say internal audit. If you do an assignment of 6 weeks where you are already on the mill and changing topics quite fast, so audit is actually the dream position for you if you're afraid of getting bored. But more seriously, what I've learned from the HR profession is that you have a kind of dead zone. The dead zone is between 6 months and 2 years or 24 months. What do I mean by that? When you change job, you can make mistake. The employer can make a mistake, or you didn't understand well when you had the recruiting interviews, etc. What was the function about, on who was the future boss, or what was the team, whatever. So if you change the job after 6 months, everybody understands that bad things sometimes happen. You're not going to take any blame after that. If you change between 6 months and 24 months, it's on you. It's not your employer anymore. You had the chance to detect that there is a problem. If you leave, that means you are unstable. And that's the rule that I heard a lot by headhunters and recruiters. After 2 years, you can start considering doing something else again. That applies also very much to internal audit. So when you have your policy of attracting talents, you have to make it very clear. Then we have a few weeks, a few months, and then we will talk with HR and maybe we send you back. But once you're here after 6 months, you have to be there for a minimum of 2 years. And we will deliver in a positive way on what I chased before, multiple assignments, personal visibility, etc. and so forth. So these are little ropes that are important to know, I believe.
Hervé, now I want to push into the part that I suspect that will make many of our listeners sit up because you have a few rules that I would call tough love. 3 in particular stands out for me. So first, that something like 70% of an audit team should be non-career auditors, which you mentioned before, people passing through rather than staying for life. And second, that a Chief Audit Executive also should serve a maximum of about 8 years. And third, your career management basics, the idea that real development comes from moving across functions, geography, and employer. Can you please take us through these? Why 70% and not the reverse of that? Why put a time limit on the most senior, most experienced person in the function? And what is the thinking behind your position? For a head of audit listening right now, perhaps feeling a bit uncomfortable, what is the deeper principle these rules are protecting?
So I like the word love more than the word rules in there. And I say that because the 70% was never a rule. It was more a kind of target in Allianz. And indeed, you can decide whether 50, 60 or 80 is the right percentage. But the point is more to say, and that's my example from 10 to 7 auditors, from 6 accountants to 2. That's the same logic. You need a core of career auditors, but this core is 20 to 30%. So you need a non-core, again, of stability, people who know the profession. They are the professionals of internal audit. So it's not about having 100% or 0% of career auditors. You need a core. You can define this core 20, 30, again, up to 50%. But it cannot be the majority. They are going to be the one who are bringing the professionalism, the techniques, the knowledge of the standards, etc., and then train the other auditors. But the point here is that. And maybe that's the important sentence, is that I don't see anymore internal audit as a full career, but as a career step. In most cases, just a career step. It's an important one. I talked about Société Générale in some examples, a defining one, but a step, and not necessarily what I've seen maybe in Asia a lot, where you get into audit and you are in audit for the rest of your life. So it's not going to be necessarily a full career. That's it's more a target or an ambition level, if you want. Very important one. Remember, we talked about democracy and the way to manage it. That's part of the plan I refer to. You need to be decisive and to say, look, HR, look, CEO, look, teams, this is what we aspire to do. Nobody is going to be bad treated. We are not throwing anybody away. But be prepared, because this is how we are going to handle medium, long term the profile of this team. So this is where targets are important, of course. The 8 years is not a target, you're right. This is a rule. And it's indeed a rule I've implemented in Allianz for two reasons. The first reason is a negative reason, because I believe that after 8 years, you really run into now we can discuss 7 or 9, okay, Thomas, but it was 8 in the case of Allianz, because you run the risk of familiarity bias and maybe some form of complacency. So I believe in the capacity for the Chief Audit Executive role to keep fresh eyes and ask yourself, why do we have this rule in most countries now of rotation of the signing partner when it comes to external audit, and why this rule wouldn't apply to internal audit? Why does internal audit, Chief Audit Executive role, differ so significantly than the one from the signing partner of an external audit? That's exactly the same logic. And I took 8 years because in a number of countries, 8 years is the rule that is taken. So that's a bit the enforcement. This is why I said negative, if you will, to force a renewal at the top of the function. Now, you can always manage exceptions, by the way, before I move to the second reason and the positive one. Because, of course, if your organization doubles sizes, you have massive growth, you do external acquisitions, etc., de facto, you get the fresh eyes. So you can always apply for exception to the rule. And we did this, of course, in Allianz each time that it was applicable. The second reason is for the very same Chief Audit Executive. It's a career management principle. Take a step back. You're going to work 40 years, more or less. 42, whatever it is in your country. I encourage anybody, and that's way beyond internal audit, to have at minimum 5 different positions in your professional life. Okay. Then, for the reasons of curiosity and learning. Okay. So then the rule is simple. 40 years divided in 5 positions, that 8 years maximum that you want to spend on a position. This is where I'm coming from. So it's an encouragement to say, instead of burying yourself, the kind of elephant cemetery, into internal audit, and you will never get out of that position, and putting yourself at risk of losing your employment, because now these days organizations change a lot. You have acquisitions, disposals, etc. Who can claim to spend 40 years in the same position and nothing happens around him or her? This doesn't exist, I think. So the fact that you have this kind of imposed rule on you, I need to change, I need to reinvent myself, in audit or somewhere else, I think it's a healthy movement. So that's the positive reason. On the 8 years, then again, I would like to share 2 calculations that I've learned from my colleagues in HR. They are called the rules of 8. And you have two rules of 8. You have the simple rule of 8. You take your age. Let's imagine that you are 48 years old. You divide by 8. That means that you're going to spend 6 years in the function. So that means that if you spend 8 years already in the function as a Chief Audit Executive, you would be 64 already. Okay. So, in fact, these are the two rules. You have the first rule, which is okay, 40 years of professional life divided by 8, or divided by 5 gives 8 years maximum in a function. But you can also be a bit more sophisticated and to factor your age, because of course, if you're 24, you might want to spend 3 years in the function and then move on to the next one.
Yeah.
At 48, 6 years, etc. And it makes a lot of sense, again, from an HR standpoint, because the older you get, the more experience you have accumulated, the higher is probably your compensation. So there is a bit of a notion of time for return on the investment by the organization.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly 8 years seems to be, when you think in this way, a kind of maximum already. So being a chief audit executive, 15 years and 20 years, really? That's how how I take it.
And where do they go? Is it supposed to be a plan that is organized by the organization? Once you finish your 8 or 9 years, you're going to have a position within the organization? Or are you saying after 8 years, and many of the heads of internal audit after 8 years, they might be 50, 55, so maybe not that easy to find a new employment?
Yes. Of course, I'm talking here, I'm taking this as with Allianz as an experience. So in my case, it was quite easy as an endogenous movement to manage, because when you have 40 internal audit teams, you can rotate chief audit executives from one entity or one team of audit to another. Okay, so that. But then it's always possible to place people with competition or with other entities. But for the most talented, we were very much willing to have them moving to compliance or to risk. Myself, I was not 8 years already on the job, but when I did my second mandate as a chief audit executive, I was already 6 years on the role, and then I've been asked to become the group chief compliance officer. Okay, so even at the most senior level, if you want to call it this way, it takes active HR management with the HR teams and with the leadership. Certainly, it's not something you can do as a chief audit executive on your own. I would agree with that, Thomas.
Okay.
The last point you were referring to is the 2 out of 3. It's actually not a concept I've developed myself. It's something I've learned in Allianz. That's an Allianz career management principle or practice. So you have these 3 dimensions: the geography, you have the function, and then you have the entity. Within Allianz, of course. And the idea is that when you do a career in a group like this, you have to change at least 2 of the 3 factors to encourage, again, this notion of mobility, and so that you keep your employability. Again, avoid that people stay too long in the same environment, and favor the multiplicity of experiences. So this is how myself I've been to Germany, back to France, and then again to Germany. You decided in compliance, in audit, in the first line, in the board, in the bank, etc. I'm actually 11 out of 3. That's the joke I was telling my teammates in Allianz. Have been 11 out of 3. That's the approach, and I think it's a fairly healthy approach, because whether you abide by the rule or the principle or not, and the same applies for the 2 other ones, by the way, at least it makes you think about how you manage your career. Remember what I said before, you are the manager of your career. So what are the metrics that you want to use? And these are no less than 3 metrics that I'm proposing at the end of the day for your own self-reflection, even before it starts to be a kind of corporate metric. And I think it can help to reflect on, where do I stand? Where am I? Is it time to move? I don't know anybody who is not asking oneself, is it time for me to move now? But based on what? So here I'm proposing some possible yardsticks to say, okay, no, I'm still good. Been 4 years. I'm 42. I can keep going. I've been 12 years on the job now. Maybe I should think about what I do next. And then proactively talk with your supervisor, your CEO, the board, whoever, about the headhunter sometimes, about what do I do next? That's life, I think.
Hervé, that brings us to chapter 3, the last chapter which I wanted to address with you today. It's managing the transformation. So far, we have talked about the what. Let us close with now the how, because this is where most good intentions quietly die. transforming a talent model means reconciling three sets of expectations that do not always align. Number one is the aspiration of the individual auditor who wants to grow. Number two is the needs of the corporation that wants capability and continuity. And number three, the hopes of the audit manager who wants to stable, high-performing team. Holding those three together is generally hard. So on top of that sits culture. There is often real resistance to the idea that audit is a career step rather than a lifelong career path, a little bit what I mentioned before. So my final question is a very practical one. How do you actually lead this change? How do you bring the individual, the organization, and the audit leadership onto the same page? How do you overcome the cultural resistance you will meet? And what does it take to get everyone, not just the leaders, to embrace that?
Yes, Thomas. We've touched already a few of the points addressing this question. If I wanted to summarize on how do we make it happen in a successful way, I would say you have to put together the internal factors and then the external factors. The internal factors are the support of the CEO and the organization in terms of culture. In fact, the capacity for the Chief Audit Executive to effectively develop a vision, a strategy, including the human resources of the team, and then for himself or herself, share that vision with the stakeholders and with the team members, define a certain aspiration level, and then engage HR into this approach and strategy. So these are the internal audit factors. You really need to lay it out in a quite formal way, and I think that helps to have this kind of documentation. Then you have the external factors. I mentioned before the fiduciary duties of directors. I think directors in the boards now are more and more conscious of the magnitude of their responsibilities, and they clearly see internal audit as their partners or advisors, especially those who are in the audit committee. So they will see also the benefit of having the best talent, of having a renewal with the franchise principle, etc. I think they will be the ones buying it. And after all, it's the board who has primarily the role of oversight and supervision of the internal audit function more than the senior management. I think in these external factors, you have this risk landscape, again, evolving so fast. We talked about it. That makes it difficult anyway for any individual and then for any team to be too static. So you need anyway to renew, reinvent yourself, and sometimes replace individuals. That's, I don't want to sound too cynical or negative, but I think it's just a fact of life. So rather than being submitted to these constraints, I rather say let's be proactive and develop a plan so that we serve on these waves of changes. And I think regulation is also another factor, but regulations like risk can be also opportunities for forcing a rather dynamic environment for the internal audit function, again, in terms of profiles, career management, etc. Now, you mentioned the resistance. Yes, there is definitely resistance. I mentioned that I took the job for the first time in 2005. Certainly, internal audit was a patchwork of practices and cultures. There was no integration of audit at the time. And it's a fact. I do not intend to mean that in a negative way, but you had a banking team with Dresdner Bank at the time that was part of Allianz. You had German auditors from the different entities. It's quite spread out across the entities and the geography, and then the French, the Italians, the South American, the Asian colleagues, American colleagues. So all with different anteriority, backgrounds, practices, methodologies, etc. So I've witnessed and been confronted. I've been on the first row to fighting the cultural change. I think the most difficult resistance is not coming from the team. It's coming from leadership or the organization. Why do I need a stronger internal audit team? And I had actually this conversation myself with a number of entity CEOs in my former group. And the image I like to use is the image of the insurance cover. of course, coming from an insurance group. But, when you drive a car, you can decide to run your risk or your car, having a full, well, I think in Germany they call it the full casco insurance cover, or just a third party liability. And I always said, I narrowed this team of 900 because I had that question at group level. Why 900? Can't you do, Hervé, the job with 600? I said, yeah, I can even do it 200. It depends. It's more, I can advise you, and my responsibility is advise you. And I'm telling you that I think we can do with 900 and we can actually do a better job. Now, you, Chair or Madam Chair of the Audit Committee, you have the ultimate responsibility. It is your risk much more than mine to decide that you want to reduce the level of your premium, using my example of insurance cover. So you have to enter into this kind of pedagogy. It's not me whining and praying to have a higher budget. It's more me advising on what is the best solution to find the balance between covering your risks profile and the level of resources that you are ready to invest, not spend. You shouldn't see internal audit as an expense, but more as an investment. How much are you ready to expense in your audit function to have an acceptable level of cover? Conversely, I could advocate to have 2,000 auditors as well. But then you have the Pareto rule 80-20, at some point. And then it's good to benchmark with your peers. And in financial services, it's quite easy to do that. Talk to your colleagues and know who is doing what and how, and then you get a pretty much good idea of what you do. And more than a good idea of what you do, you get a good argument to talk to your CEO and your chair of the audit committee to say, oh, in Zurich, since we talked about Martin before, in Zurich, they do it like this. It would be a bit strange that we do it differently and with different calibration, etc. And I think leadership is always very competitive, and they want to see we are a bit subpar with competition. We need to up our game. So that's also something you want to use. But at the end, the question remains: how safe do you want to be? And this is how you turn around this culture question. It's more about how much safety do you want to have in your environment. And I think now what has changed is that in this context that we discussed at the beginning in the introduction with the three challenges, this is the opportunity to reposition internal audit in all these dimensions of advisory, risk, etc. And this implies a new balance, probably balance in profile of the auditors, profile of resources, profile in terms of services in a larger way that can be provided to the organization, if that makes sense. So then managing change is possible. I'm not saying it's easy. It took me years.
But it also makes it very interesting, isn't it?
It is, absolutely, yes. I mean it's a kind of mindset, I suppose. But I think if you're a chief auditor or a chief audit executive, has to be someone who likes challenges and difficult stuff, right? I mean, it's not an easy job. We all know that. It's one of those jobs that is difficult in the organization. So managing change and achieve or contributing to a cultural change, or at least when it comes to the positioning of the internal audit function, is one of the exciting challenges, of course. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. Hervé, before we close, one short reflection for our listeners. If you could leave every head of internal audit with a single piece of advice on talent, the one thing you would tell them to start doing as soon as possible, what would that be? Very short.
Very short. We talked about succession planning, and I would say do not hire or do not plan to hire the next you. That will embark what we talked about, diversity and renewal, etc. Do not hire the next you. And if you allow me a second short sentence, keep a good sense of humor. We said it's a difficult job. It is, but it shouldn't prevent you to keep a smile on your face. So a sense of humor is a good way to keep a healthy distance sometimes with some difficult real situation.
Hervé, I love that. And thank you so much for this rich and refreshingly honest conversation we had over the last almost 2 hours. What strikes me the most is how you turn the anxiety about the future into something that is very much energizing. AI does not diminish the auditor. It raises the bar for the human qualities that always matters the most. Building great teams is not about holding on to people. It is about attracting them, growing them, and having the confidence to let them go or to let them fly. What I personally take away is the reminder that a talent plan deserves the same rigor as an audit plan, and that the courage we ask from our auditors, we must also show as leaders in how we build and renew our own teams. Did I summarize this correctly, Hervé?
Absolutely. Fantastic, Thomas. Thank you.
If our listeners would like to connect with you, follow your work, or learn more about you and the Paracas Advisory Group and your thinking on audit talents, where can they find you?
Well, you easily find me on LinkedIn, that's for sure. Also, you can follow me or connect. Happy to do that. I would say, since I suppose a part of your audience, Thomas, is in Switzerland, we are neighbors. Again, I'm mostly, not always, but mostly based in Munich. So I'm not that far. So I'm always available to meet or any kind of event or conversation you want to have. I'm only a few hours away. I'm really close.
Yeah. And Munich is also worth the travel, always great people, great food.
Definitely.
Great
Absolutely.
city. Hervé, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to everyone listening around the world for being part of this fast growing community of governance professionals. If you enjoyed this dialogue, please share it with your colleagues, your audit committee members, and the leaders around you who care about the future of our profession. And do not forget to follow Governance Unplugged on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and even YouTube now for more candid conversation like this one. And as always, let's build smarter, more resilient organization, one conversation at a time. Stay bold, stay informed, and keep driving governance excellence.